A humble boy rescues an injured girl, unaware that she is the heir to a great empire capable of changing his destiny forever. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the journey. Lucas Hartley was no stranger to hard work. At 17, he had long since learned the value of a day's labor, spent on the dusty fields and the humble barn of his family's farm. His life was simple, predictable, and he found comfort in the routine, though there was always a part of him that longed for something more. But for now, he was content. Or so he thought. The day had started like any other, the sun rising over the distant hills, casting a warm golden glow across the field. Lucas wiped his brow, the morning dew heavy on his skin. The world around him felt still, like it was holding its breath. Then, out of nowhere, a strange sound pierced the silence, a faint cry. It was distant, almost drowned out by the wind, but it was enough to make his heart race. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the horizon. There, lying motionless on the edge of the forest, was a figure. A young girl, her hair tangled and matted with dirt, her clothes torn and stained with blood. Without hesitation, Lucas sprinted toward her, the pounding of his heart louder than his footsteps on the dry earth. As he knelt beside her, his hands trembling, he could feel the weight of the moment. Her breath was shallow, her pulse weak. She was alive, just barely. Lucas didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing for sure. She needed him. He carefully scooped her up in his arms, his mind racing as he rushed her back to the farmhouse. There was no time to waste. As he crossed the threshold of the small house, his mother looked up, concern immediately clouding her face. "Lucas, what's going on?" "There's a girl," he said breathlessly. "She's hurt badly. We need to help." His mother's eyes widened with worry, but she didn't question him. Together, they laid the girl on the worn-out couch. Lucas's heart was pounding in his chest, his hands still shaking as he tried to assess the damage. Her head wound was severe, but nothing seemed fatal. Yet as he looked at her, there was something in the way she lay there, still and quiet, that sent a shiver down his spine. "I'll fetch the first aid kit," his mother said, her voice thick with fear. But before she could leave the room, the girl's eyes fluttered open. "Who are you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile like glass, and yet it held an undeniable strength. Lucas froze, his breath caught in his throat. He had no answer for her, no explanation. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her alone. "You're safe now," he said softly, unsure of what else to say. "We're going to help you." The girl's gaze softened as she looked up at him, confusion clouding her eyes. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice laced with fear. "You're at my home," Lucas replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "You were hurt. You need to rest." But even as he spoke those words, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was no ordinary encounter. There was something about this girl, something he couldn't place, but it pulled at him, a sensation too strong to ignore. As his mother returned with the first aid kit, the girl's eyes closed once more, and her breath slowed. It was as though she had passed out again. Lucas sat back, unsure of what to do next. Who was she? And why had she ended up here, in his life, so suddenly? The answers to those questions would come soon enough. But for now, all he could do was wait. The morning light was softer than usual, as if the world, too, was holding its breath. Lucas sat by the girl's side, watching her sleep, his mind spinning with questions that had no answers. She was so fragile, yet there was an undeniable strength about her. He couldn't explain it, but something about the way she held herself, even unconscious, spoke of someone far more important than a simple stranger. His mother, Margaret, had insisted he go out to the barn and do his chores. "Let me take care of her for now," she had said with an air of practicality that calmed him, though he didn't feel ready to leave her side. But there was no denying his mother's wisdom. She was right. They couldn't keep their lives paused for long, and the day would not wait. As he worked through the motions of feeding the animals, his mind kept wandering back to the girl. What had happened to her? Who was she? By the time he returned to the house a couple of hours later, the girl was awake again, sitting up and staring out the small window, as though searching for something. She couldn't find. She flinched when Lucas entered, and for a moment he thought she might retreat. But she didn't. Instead, she turned slowly toward him, her eyes filled with a deep, unspoken sadness. "You're awake," Lucas said, his voice gentle, as if afraid to disturb the delicate atmosphere. She nodded slowly but didn't speak right away. She was wearing a faded, simple dress that had clearly seen better days. A slight tremor ran through her fingers as she traced the edge of a chipped teacup on the table before her. "Do you remember anything?" Lucas asked cautiously. "Anything at all?" The girl hesitated, her eyes flickering as if the words were there but just out of reach. I don't know," she said, her voice strained. "It's all a blur. I remember running, but I don't know why." Lucas sat down across from her, his eyes searching hers. She was beautiful, in a way that felt almost too delicate, too ethereal for someone from the town. There was an air of nobility about her, a quiet grace that contrasted with the dirt and weariness of her appearance. Something inside him tugged at the idea that she didn't belong here. "You're safe now," Lucas said, though it felt like the wrong thing to say. "But if you remember anything, I'll do everything I can to help." The girl glanced out the window, again her expression distant. "I don't belong here," she muttered. "I shouldn't be here." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. The words were out before he could stop himself. "Where do you belong?" She turned her gaze back to him, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. For a moment, it felt like she was trying to decide whether or not to tell him something. Something important. "I don't remember," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Before Lucas could respond, his mother entered the room, carrying a tray with food and a warm smile. She placed the tray down between them and gave the girl a kind look. "I'm glad to see you're awake. We've got some food here just to help you regain your strength." The girl looked at the food as if it were an unfamiliar concept, but then her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. I haven't eaten in a long time." As she ate slowly, Lucas could see that her body was still trembling. Not just from the physical injuries, but from something deeper, something buried beneath her confusion. He couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her, and why she was so adamant that she didn't belong here. Later that evening, after Margaret had settled in for the night, Lucas sat with the girl by the hearth. The fire crackled gently, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The girl had fallen quiet again, lost in her own thoughts. "You don't have to tell me everything," Lucas said quietly. "But I don't know what to do. I want to help you, but I need to understand." She looked at him, her eyes tired, as if weighed down by invisible burdens. "I can't remember much," she repeated, "but I know there's something important. Something dangerous." Lucas leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Her expression hardened for a split second, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't know who did this to me, but I think they're coming for me. And when they do, they won't stop." The weight of her words settled between them, heavy and unsettling. Lucas opened his mouth to ask more, but she held up a hand, silencing him. "I don't want to put you in danger," she said firmly. "I don't belong here, and I need to leave. Before they find me." It wasn't the answer Lucas had been hoping for. In fact, it only raised more questions. But there was something in the way she said it, something in her voice that made him believe she wasn't just afraid of being caught. She was terrified of something much bigger, something much more dangerous than he could imagine. The night fell quietly over the farm, the soft rustling of leaves outside the window, the only sound breaking the stillness. But for Lucas, sleep was elusive. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl, her haunted words echoing in his mind. "I think they're coming for me." The thought seemed impossible, yet the fear in her eyes had been undeniable. It was just past midnight when Lucas heard it, the faintest noise from outside. He froze, listening carefully. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then he heard it again. A low creak, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching, on the gravel path near the barn. His heart started pounding in his chest. Who could be out there at this hour? Quietly, he slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb his mother, and made his way to the window. From the shadow of the porch, he could just make out a figure, a tall man moving with deliberate precision. He was cloaked in darkness, but Lucas could feel the tension in the air, like the man was aware of being watched, yet didn't care. Lucas backed away from the window, his mind racing. Could it be someone looking for the girl? A part of him wanted to rush outside and confront the man, but the other part knew that would be foolish. If this man had anything to do with the girl's warning, Lucas needed to be careful. He turned toward the girl's room, his hand hovering on the door. It had only been hours since she had spoken about the danger that followed her, and now he was beginning to believe her. Something about the way she had said it, so matter-of-fact yet with such fear, sent a chill through him. He hesitated for a moment, then opened the door just a crack. She was still asleep, or so it seemed. Her silhouette, framed by the faint glow of the moonlight, was peaceful, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that her nightmare was only just beginning. As he watched her, a sudden thought hit him like a bolt of lightning. What if her memories weren't gone? What if she was hiding them? What if she was too scared to tell him the truth? The sound of the man outside grew louder, now accompanied by another figure. 2. They were getting closer, and Lucas knew he couldn't stay hidden for long. He had to act, and fast. His first instinct was to wake his mother and tell her to hide, but he couldn't. He didn't even know what they were up against. The last thing he wanted was to put his mother in danger. He crept downstairs, grabbed a lantern, and headed toward the barn. His boots thudded softly against the wooden floorboards as he tried to move without making a sound. When he reached the back door, he paused, hearing muffled voices. The figures had arrived at the barn, but they were speaking in hushed tones. 2. Far away for Lucas to make out the words. Taking a deep breath, he slipped outside into the cool night air. The shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, hiding the figures as they moved along the side of the barn, but Lucas kept his distance, staying low to the ground. He needed answers. From the cover of a large haystack, he watched as the 2 men stopped in front of the barn door. The taller of the 2 knelt down, his hand brushing the ground before he straightened up and whispered something to the other. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what they were saying, but it was clear they were looking for something. Or someone. His thoughts raced as he considered his next move. Should he confront them, or should he retreat and get his mother? No. He needed to find out more. The only way to protect the girl was to understand what kind of danger they were facing. He moved forward cautiously, inching closer to the men. He was so close now that he could hear their words clearly. "She's here, I know it," the taller man said, his voice sharp. "We just need to get inside. She won't have anywhere to run." The other man nodded. "We'll find her. She doesn't belong here. She never should have gotten away." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. The girl. They were talking about her. His mind spun, trying to piece together what little information he had. Who were these men? Why were they after her? Before he could make a move, the barn door creaked open. Both men froze, their eyes darting toward the sound. They hadn't seen him yet, but it was only a matter of time. "Shit," one of them muttered before both men ducked into the barn, their figures swallowed by the darkness. Lucas felt the heat of panic rising in his chest. He had to do something, and fast. He turned around and ran back to the house, nearly tripping over the uneven ground in his haste. His heart was racing, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely out of his depth. But the girl's safety depended on him. He had to protect her. When he reached the house, he burst through the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Mom, we need to go, now!" Margaret shot up from her chair, alarmed by his sudden urgency. "What's wrong, Lucas?" "There are men. They're looking for her," he said, his voice tight with fear. We have to hide her. We don't have much time. Margaret's face went pale. What do you mean looking for her? Who are they? Lucas didn't have time to explain everything. He grabbed his mother's arm and pulled her toward the stairs. Get her. We need to move now. They ran up the stairs to the girl's room. But when they reached the door, Lucas stopped cold. The girl was gone. Her bed was empty. The window was wide open, and the wind blew through the curtains like a ghost. Where is she? Margaret whispered, panic rising in her voice. Lucas's heart sank. She's gone, and we're too late. The chill in the air seemed to crawl beneath Lucas's skin, his heart racing as the cold realization hit him. She was gone. The girl, the one he had promised to protect, had vanished without a trace. It wasn't just the open window that unsettled him. It was the feeling that she had known something was coming, that her departure was somehow inevitable. His mother's voice shook him from his thoughts. What do you mean, Lucas? Where could she have gone? We were just talking. I don't know, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. She must have heard something. Those men, I think they were after her. She knew they'd come. Margaret's face paled even further, the panic now clear in her expression. But how could she have disappeared so quickly? It's impossible. Lucas didn't answer. He had no explanation. All he knew was that something far bigger than him was unfolding, something that tied his life to this mysterious girl in ways he couldn't yet understand. His gaze darted to the open window once more. We have to find her, Lucas said urgently. She's not safe, and those men, they're dangerous. He moved toward the window, peering out into the blackness. The faint outlines of the barn and trees were barely visible in the moonlight. There were no signs of movement outside now, just silence. A silence that felt heavy, oppressive. But somewhere out there the girl was alone, possibly scared, and Lucas had no idea where to begin looking. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. What are we going to do, Lucas? We can't just go out there. We don't even know who those men are. He turned toward her, frustration welling up inside him. I don't care who they are. I can't just sit here while she's out there alone. I have to find her. I promised her that I'd protect her. Margaret's eyes softened, the motherly concern she always carried evident. I understand, Lucas, but we don't know what we're up against. We have to be careful. Lucas clenched his fists. Careful won't get her back. We have to act now, before it's too late. His mother sighed, her face crumpling with worry. But in the end, she nodded. Then we'll go together. But you have to promise me we'll stay safe. You're all I have. Lucas swallowed hard, his mother's words hitting him harder than he expected. She was right. He couldn't afford to be reckless, not when the stakes were so high. He owed it, to her and to the girl, to make sure they all made it through this. The two of them descended the stairs as quietly as possible, moving with purpose through the darkened house. Lucas had no clear plan, no roadmap to guide him. All he knew was that he had to act fast and he had to trust his instincts. They couldn't let this girl disappear from their lives. As they reached the front door, Lucas froze. His heart skipped a beat. There, on the doorstep, was a single delicate flower. The same kind of flower the girl had been wearing in her hair. When Lucas first found her, he bent down to pick it up, his mind racing. The flower hadn't been there earlier. He was certain of it. Someone had left it for him, a clue, a sign that they knew he was coming. What is it? Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Lucas's thoughts raced. Could this be a message? He didn't know who could have left it, but the possibility sent an icy chill through his veins. It's a warning, he muttered. Someone's been watching us. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Both of them jumped in surprise, their hearts racing. Who is it? Lucas called out, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at his insides. A moment of silence passed before a voice answered, low and calm but filled with authority. It's me. I need to speak with you. Lucas recognized the voice, though it made his stomach twist. It was Sheriff Nolan, the local lawman. But why would he be here at this hour? And why did his voice sound so distant, so measured? Lucas glanced at his mother, his mind racing. What could the sheriff want? Was he connected to those men? Was this part of the danger they had been warned about? "Mom, stay inside," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll handle this." Margaret nodded reluctantly, but there was a look of concern in her eyes. "Be careful, Lucas." He stepped cautiously toward the door, the flower still clutched tightly in his hand. As he reached for the doorknob, his heart pounded in his chest. There was something wrong here, something he couldn't put his finger on. When Lucas opened the door, Sheriff Nolan stood before him, a grim expression on his face. His dark eyes swept over Lucas quickly, as if scanning him for any sign of threat. "Evening, Lucas," Nolan said, his voice low but steady. "I need to ask you some questions." "About what?" Lucas replied, trying to mask the growing unease in his chest. "About the girl," Nolan said, his gaze sharp. "I've been informed that she's here. Where is she?" The question sent a jolt of fear through Lucas. "She's not here anymore," he said quickly. "She left." Sheriff Nolan's eyes narrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. Left, or was she taken? Before Lucas could respond, a distant howl cut through the air, sending a shockwave of terror through him. It was the unmistakable sound of a wolf, faint but close. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Nolan's face darkened. "I think we both know what's going on here," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I'm afraid you're in more danger than you realize." The wind howled through the trees as if it carried secrets Lucas wasn't ready to hear. Sheriff Nolan's words hung heavy in the air, his voice laced with an unease that Lucas couldn't ignore. The fear, once hidden beneath a thin veil of confusion, now bubbled up inside him. He had never heard the sheriff speak like that before. "I don't understand," Lucas said, his voice shaking. "What do you mean? What's going on? What danger?" Nolan's eyes flickered to the flower in Lucas's hand, and his expression darkened even further. "You're in way over your head, boy. That girl you found, she's not just some lost traveler. She's tied to something much bigger, something dangerous." Lucas felt his stomach tighten. "What are you talking about? She's just a girl who got hurt. I couldn't just leave her." The sheriff's jaw tightened and he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "That's the problem. You've just made yourself a target. There are people after her, people who will stop at nothing to get her back." Lucas's mind raced. "Who are they? What do they want with her?" Nolan shook his head. "I don't have all the answers, but I've seen enough to know they won't let you or anyone else stand in their way. You need to stay away from this, Lucas. Leave it alone." But Lucas couldn't. He had already made the decision to protect her, and now that the sheriff had confirmed how dangerous it was, there was no turning back. "I can't just walk away. I can't let them hurt her." Nolan's gaze softened for a moment, as if he understood the struggle in Lucas's eyes. "You don't get it. You're not just protecting a girl anymore, you're protecting an entire legacy. Her legacy." The weight of those words sank deep into Lucas's chest. He stepped back, trying to process what the sheriff was implying. "A legacy? Who is she, really?" The sheriff hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for anyone listening. "She's the last of the Irons family, the heir to a vast empire, an empire that controls more than just land or money. People have fought wars over what she stands to inherit, and there are those who will kill to keep it from her." Lucas stood, frozen, the enormity of what Nolan was saying slowly sinking in. The girl he had found, the girl he had sworn to protect, was not just any ordinary person. She was the key to something far beyond his comprehension, something so powerful it had already started to destroy everything he knew. The wind gusted, and the door creaked behind them. Lucas turned, seeing Margaret standing there, her face pale as she clutched the doorframe for support. "Lucas," she said quietly. "What's going on? What is he talking about?" Before Lucas could answer, Nolan spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "This isn't just a small-town problem, Margaret. This is bigger than anything we've ever dealt with. They've come for her, and if we don't act fast, it'll be too late." Lucas felt his pulse quicken. "Who's after her? Who are they?" Nolan's expression hardened. "I can't say their names, Lucas, not yet, but I can tell you one thing. They know exactly who you are now, and they know exactly where she is. You need to get her out of here. You need to run." A chill washed over Lucas, and for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Could they even escape from something so big? Something that could swallow him whole? "Where do we go? What do we do?" Sheriff Nolan's eyes flickered to the woods beyond the farm. "There's a place. It's a safe house. Somewhere they won't think to look, but you'll have to trust me. Trust that I'm doing everything I can to protect you." Lucas looked at his mother, seeing the concern written all over her face. "Mom, I don't know what to do," he said, his voice breaking. "What if it's too late? What if we don't make it out?" Margaret took a step forward, her eyes filled with fear but also determination. "We'll do whatever it takes, Lucas. You're not alone in this." The sheriff nodded grimly. "That's the right answer. But time is running out." Suddenly a loud noise pierced the silence. The unmistakable sound of a car engine, the tires skidding on dirt. It was distant but growing closer. A sound that sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. "Get inside," Nolan barked. "Now!" Lucas grabbed his mother's arm and pulled her into the house, his heart pounding in his chest. The sheriff stepped forward, peering out into the darkened night. "Who is it?" Lucas whispered, feeling the tension in the air. The sheriff's voice was low, grim. "They're here." Inside the house, the world felt smaller, the walls closing in. Every sound, every creak of the floor, seemed amplified in the quiet tension that hung in the air. Lucas's mind raced. Who were these people? And why were they after the girl? How had they found them so quickly? Margaret's grip on his arm tightened. "Lucas, we can't stay here. We need to leave. Now." "I know," he whispered. But he was already moving toward the back door, his mind spinning. The girl, wherever she was in danger. And he wasn't about to let her face it alone. As they slipped out the back, the cold air hit them like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. The lights from the sheriff's truck lit up the yard, casting long shadows across the dirt. "Where do we go now?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Nolan didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the area. Then he nodded toward the woods. "We head for the cabin. Stay quiet, stay low, and don't trust anyone." They moved quickly, their feet barely making a sound as they headed for the tree line. But as they neared the woods, Lucas's breath caught in his throat. From the corner of his eye, he saw them. Figures. Dark shapes moving quickly through the trees. "They're coming," Lucas said, his voice full of dread. "What do we do now?" Nolan turned, his eyes locking with Lucas's. "We fight, or we run. But either way, it's time to make a choice." The forest seemed endless as they trudged through the thick underbrush, the cold air pressing against their faces. The sounds of the night, crickets, the occasional owl, the rustling of leaves, were drowned out by the pounding of Lucas's heart. His legs were starting to ache, his breath shallow, but he didn't dare stop. They were being hunted. The sense of danger wasn't a distant threat anymore. It was as close as the trees surrounding them. "Do you think they saw us?" Margaret whispered, her voice strained. Lucas shook his head, his eyes scanning the darkened woods. "I don't know, but we can't stop now. We have to keep moving." The sheriff led the way, his flashlight cutting through the night. The beam of light flickered over twisted branches and forgotten trails, leading them deeper into the forest. They didn't speak for a while, each of them lost in their own thoughts. But Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every so often he thought he saw movement in the distance, shadows that didn't belong, watching them. From just beyond the trees, the cabin was supposed to be close. Nolan had mentioned it so casually, as though it were just a stop on a long journey. But now that they were out here, in the thick of it, Lucas wasn't sure if he was more afraid of what lay ahead or what they had left behind. Suddenly, Nolan stopped in his tracks, holding up his hand for silence. "Stay low," he muttered, crouching down to peer into the darkness ahead. Lucas dropped to a knee instinctively, trying to control his breathing. He heard nothing but the wind, yet a chill ran through him. He could feel eyes on him. "They've found us," Nolan whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "How do you know?" Lucas asked, barely breathing. Nolan didn't respond right away. His eyes were locked onto something in the distance. Then slowly he rose to his feet, his face set with grim determination. "I know because I've been in this situation before. They're closing in and we don't have much time." "Who are they?" Margaret's voice cracked, the fear finally breaking through. Nolan turned to face her, his expression softened, but only slightly. "People who will stop at nothing to get her. The girl you saved, she's not just someone's daughter. She's the last of a legacy, an empire, if you will. A family that's built its power on secrets, lies, and blood." "Blood?" Lucas repeated, his heart pounding harder now. "What do you mean? What kind of family is she really from?" Nolan exhaled slowly. "The Irons family, one of the wealthiest and most influential dynasties in the world. But the last generation, they made enemies. Powerful enemies. Enemies who will kill anyone to control that power." "But why her?" Margaret's voice was trembling now. "She's just a girl. What's she supposed to do with all that?" Nolan's eyes darkened. "That's exactly what they're afraid of. If she inherits what's hers, they'll lose everything. And they'll do anything to make sure she doesn't." Lucas's mind was racing. The girl he had found, Juno Irons, was the heir to something vast and dangerous. He could feel the weight of it now. His entire life had just been turned upside down, and nothing was what it seemed. "Is that why we're running, because they'll stop at nothing to get to her?" Lucas asked, his voice tight with fear. "Exactly," Nolan replied, his tone hardening. "But we're not running for her. At least, not just for her, we're running for all of us. If they catch her, there's no telling what kind of hell they'll bring down on us. On this whole town." A harsh wind swept through the trees, and Lucas pulled his jacket tighter around him. But it wasn't the cold that made his skin crawl. It was the sensation of being watched, the looming dread that surrounded them. He could feel it now, an invisible hand closing in on them, tightening with every step they took. The cabin, Nolan had said, was close. But it felt like it was miles away, swallowed by the vast darkness that surrounded them. Suddenly a flicker of light appeared through the trees, faint at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. A headlamp. Someone was coming. Fast. Down. Nolan hissed, and they all dropped to the ground, lying flat against the dirt. Lucas's heart raced, and for a moment he could hardly breathe. His body pressed against the cold earth felt like a tomb. The light grew closer, and Lucas could make out the shadowy figures of two men, walking swiftly along the path. Their footsteps were nearly silent, but Lucas could hear the faint crunch of leaves beneath their boots. They were close, too close. "Stay still," Nolan whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're searching for us. If we move, we're dead." Lucas nodded, his heart pounding in his throat. He could hear his mother's breath shallow beside him, and for a moment everything went quiet. The wind, the distant howls of wolves, the faint crackling of twigs underfoot. They all disappeared into the tense silence that hung around them. The men passed by, oblivious to their presence. Lucas barely dared to move, his eyes locked on the ground, willing his breath to stay steady. They were so close. He could feel the heat from their bodies as they walked past, but they never saw them. It felt like an eternity. Once the men were out of earshot, Nolan motioned for them to move. "Now," he whispered. They rose to their feet, and without a word, they sprinted toward the trees. The cabin was just ahead, a faint outline in the distance. They had made it, but just as they reached the cabin's door, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle engine roared to life in the distance, tires screeching, heading toward them. It wasn't over. The cabin stood before them like a forgotten relic, nestled in the shadows of the forest. It was small, with weathered wood and cracked windows, but it felt safe, almost like a hiding place carved from the earth itself. The sound of the engine grew louder, pulling Lucas from his thoughts. He felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. "Get inside," Nolan urged, pulling open the creaky door. He didn't wait for them to respond, his voice urgent but calm, like someone who had been through this before. Quickly. Lucas didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Margaret's arm, pulling her into the cabin behind him, as Nolan slammed. The door shut. The dim light from the old lantern inside cast long shadows across the room. The air inside smelled of mildew and dust, a stark contrast to the fresh forest air they had just left behind. But it didn't matter. They were safe, for now. Nolan immediately moved to the window, peeking through a crack in the boards. His face was tense, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. The rumble of the approaching vehicle grew louder, and Lucas could feel the tension in the air, thick as smoke. The feeling of being hunted hadn't left him. It was only growing stronger. "What are we going to do now?" Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. She wasn't used to fear like this, not real fear, not the kind that made your skin crawl and your heart pound in your chest. "We wait," Nolan replied, his voice low and steady. "They'll pass. They won't see us. Just keep quiet." Lucas walked over to the corner of the room, his hand brushing against a dusty table. His mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together. Juno was the key to something far larger than he had ever imagined. But the more he learned, the more questions he had. Why had she been abandoned in the forest? And what did her family really want with her? "How long do you think we'll be safe here?" Lucas asked, his voice tight with unease. Nolan didn't look at him, still watching out the window. "Not long, but it's enough to rest, gather our strength, and figure out what we're going to do next. There's a lot more at play here than you realize." "Who's after us, after Juno?" Lucas asked again, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "You keep talking about enemies, but you never explain who they are. What's the real story here, Nolan?" Nolan's face hardened at the question, and for a moment there was a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Margaret shifted uneasily beside him, sensing the change in the air. "You want the truth?" Nolan finally spoke, his voice low. "You won't like it. But if we're going to survive this, you need to know." Lucas stepped closer, the anticipation building. "Tell me." Nolan turned, his eyes locked onto Lucas. "Juno's family, her father especially, was a powerful man. Businessman with connections, with wealth, with influence. He built an empire from the ground up, but he wasn't a man to be trusted. He made deals with people that no one should have ever made. And those deals, they come with consequences." "Consequences?" Lucas repeated, the words sinking into his mind like heavy stones. "What kind of consequences?" "Death," Nolan replied bluntly. "The kind that follows you no matter where you go. People like Juno's father, they don't just make enemies. They destroy lives, and now those enemies are looking for her. They want her, not just because of what she's inherited, but because she's the only one who can undo the wrongs her father did." A chill ran down Lucas's spine as the weight of Nolan's words sank in. Juno wasn't just some innocent girl, caught in the crossfire. She was the answer, the key to the legacy her father had left behind. And there were people out there who would stop at nothing to get to her. "How do we fix this?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nolan gave him a long, hard look. "We don't fix it. We survive. That's all we can do." Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching on the gravel outside made Lucas's heart jump into his throat. Someone was here. They had found them. "They're here," Nolan hissed, moving quickly to the back of the cabin. "Get to the basement, now." Without a word, Lucas grabbed Margaret's hand and pulled her toward the small trap door in the floor. They descended into the darkness, the musty smell of earth and old wood filling their noses. It was cramped, cold, and the only sound was their breathing, loud and frantic. Lucas could hear footsteps above them, the creak of the floorboards as someone moved through the cabin. He held his breath, straining to hear every sound. The tension was unbearable. "Who are they?" Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not good people," Lucas muttered. "I don't know how much longer we can stay hidden." The footsteps above stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but the deafening silence of the forest. Lucas's heart was pounding in his chest, his mind racing. Were they going to find them? Were they going to make it out of here alive? Just as the question hung in the air, the trap door above them creaked open. The figure that descended into the basement was not a stranger. It was someone Lucas had seen before, someone he had hoped never to meet again. "Don't move," the man said, his voice cold and calculating. "You're not going anywhere." The figure in the doorway loomed like a shadow, his features barely visible in the dim light of the basement. Lucas's pulse quickened, his mind racing. His hand, instinctively, tightened around the small rusted pipe he had grabbed earlier from the corner. He wasn't going down without a fight, not after everything they had already been through. Margaret trembled beside him, but he could feel her gripping his arm, holding on tight, as if seeking reassurance. He gave her a quick glance, trying to calm her with his eyes, though inside, he was anything but calm. The man stepped forward into the basement, his boots echoing against the cold, concrete floor. His face was still partially obscured by the darkness, but Lucas could make out a few sharp details. A scar running down his left cheek, the slight glint of something metallic in his hand. "Stay back," Lucas barked, stepping forward with the sail. Pipe raised. "I don't want trouble," the man chuckled low and dark. "Trouble? Kid, you've already stepped into a world full of trouble. You think a pipe's going to stop me?" His voice was rough like gravel, but there was something unsettlingly calm about it. He didn't seem threatened by Lucas at all. "You should know better than that. You're with them, aren't you?" Margaret's voice cracked, but there was a defiance in it. "You work for my father's enemies." The man's eyes flickered toward her. He tilted his head, almost as if considering her words, before letting out another low chuckle. "Your father's enemies?" he repeated, amused. "Girl, your father's the one who made enemies, not the other way around. But that's not why I'm here." The statement hung in the air like a threat. Lucas's heart was hammering in his chest. "Then why are you here?" he demanded, his voice shaky but resolute. He had to know. They couldn't afford to be in the dark anymore. The man paused, then let out a sigh, his eyes softening, just for a moment. "I'm here because you've got something I need. And I'm here to make you an offer." Lucas stared at him, confused. An offer? What could someone like this have to offer them? The tension in the room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Margaret looked between the two men, her face pale but determined. "What kind of offer?" she asked cautiously. The man stepped closer, his movements deliberate but not threatening. He knelt down, putting himself at eye level with her. "Listen to me carefully," he said in a low, almost conspiratorial. "Tunos, I know who you are and I know what's coming. The people after you, they're not just after your father's fortune. They're after something much more dangerous. And if you keep running, you'll just end up trapped, with nowhere to turn. But if you trust me, I can help you." Margaret looked to Lucas, uncertainty clouding her eyes. He felt her hesitation, the same fear he was feeling. He didn't trust this man, not for a second, but something in his gut told him they had no choice but to listen. "What's the catch?" Lucas asked, his voice low and challenging. He wasn't going to fall for any tricks. The man didn't flinch. "No catch, just help. I have the resources you need and I know how to get you out of this mess. But you've got to trust me, kid. You're in way over your head. I don't trust anyone who shows up at a time like this," Lucas snapped, his grip tightening on the pipe. "And I sure as hell don't trust people who threaten us." The man's eyes flashed with something like amusement before he stood up and took a step back. "I'm not threatening you, boy. I'm trying to save your life." His gaze flickered to the trapdoor above. "And you're about to find out just how much trouble you're really in." Lucas swallowed hard, his mind spinning. "Who are you?" "Name's Isaac," the man said simply. "And I'm not your enemy, but if you want to stay alive, you need to listen." The silence in the room deepened, and for a moment it felt like time itself had paused. Lucas didn't know whether to take the man at his word or prepare to fight. But then something happened. Something small, almost imperceptible. A sound. A faint rumble from outside. Isaac's eyes flicked toward the trapdoor again. He grabbed the lantern from the table, the firelight dancing across his face as he turned back to Lucas and Margaret. "Get ready," he whispered. "They're here." Before Lucas could respond, the trapdoor above them burst open, and heavy footsteps pounded on the wooden floor. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The cabin had been found. Isaac quickly moved into action, grabbing both Lucas and Margaret by the arm. "This way," he urged, pulling them toward the far corner of the basement. There was a narrow hidden passage behind a stack of crates. "Move, now!" The urgency in his voice left no room for doubt. They had no choice but to follow. They scrambled through the narrow passage, their feet stumbling over loose rocks and roots that seemed to grow out of the earth itself. Lucas could hear the voices above, shouting, demanding, searching. They were closing in. Isaac led them down the passage, his hand never letting go of Lucas or Margaret. As they reached the end of the tunnel, they were met with the sight of an old rusted ladder leading up to another trapdoor, hidden beneath the floorboards of a different building. "Where does this lead?" Margaret asked, panting, her voice tight. With fear, Isaac paused, looking at her with a strange, unreadable expression. "The only place you'll be safe for now." The hidden tunnel felt endless as they climbed through the damp, musty space, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The air was thick with the smell of earth and decay, making it hard to breathe. But Lucas didn't care. He was too focused on the pounding of his heart, the only rhythm he could hear. Isaac moved with an unsettling calm, guiding them through the dark with the lantern, his face obscured by the shadows. Margaret walked beside, him, her hands trembling as she clutched Lucas's sleeve. They didn't speak, the silence stretching between them heavy and pregnant with fear. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into something they didn't understand, something far beyond them. This Isaac might have saved them from immediate danger, but how could they trust someone so mysterious? And what did he mean by, "they're here"? Who were they, really? After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel finally opened up into a small, dimly lit room. The trapdoor above them creaked, and Isaac lifted it with ease, peering out cautiously. "Stay close," he whispered, pulling them up into the room. The moment Lucas emerged, he found himself in what looked like an old storage facility, stacked high with crates and barrels. But the place was different. It wasn't just a storage building. It had the eerie, almost deliberate feel of a hideout. Isaac shut the trapdoor silently behind them and turned to face them. His eyes, now fully visible in the light, were hard, calculating. He didn't look like someone who had been in hiding for long. He looked prepared, almost like he'd been waiting for something like this to happen. "Where are we?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking but determined. She had regained some composure, but the unease never fully left her. Isaac motioned for them to follow him as he walked toward a back corner of the room. "This is a safe house. It's been kept off the radar. For years. People like you, people who are being hunted, need places like this. People like me?" Margaret repeated, confusion clouding her voice. Isaac didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled aside a dusty sheet from a table, revealing a series of old maps and documents scattered across it. The maps were of cities, regions Lucas didn't recognize, but there were markings on them, red circles, X's, and other symbols that made his stomach twist. Margaret stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. "What is all this?" Isaac didn't answer right away. He seemed lost in thought for a moment, before finally meeting their gazes. "Your father," he began, his voice grim, "wasn't just any businessman. He was involved in something much larger, something dangerous. The people after you are after more than money. They're after control, power." Lucas felt the room spin for a moment. His mind was racing. "You mean my father was mixed up in something illegal?" Isaac's gaze hardened. "No, not illegal. Something far worse. Something that, if it falls into the wrong hands, could destroy everything you know." Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. "What could be worse than money? What could be so dangerous?" Isaac met her eyes with a cold, hard look. "The truth. The word hung in the air like a bell tolling in the distance. It echoed through the room, vibrating in Lucas's chest. Margaret swallowed hard. What truth? Isaac took a step forward. His face closer now. His eyes locked on hers. Your father's enemies, people with unimaginable wealth and influence, aren't just after his fortune. They want the key to a secret that your father protected at all costs. And now, they think you have it. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. What secret? His voice cracked with disbelief. Isaac reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. He placed it on the table in front of them. The seal on it was unfamiliar to Lucas, a symbol he had never seen before. An intricate design of intertwined vines surrounding a single letter. This, Isaac said softly, is what they're after. Margaret's eyes widened in recognition, a look of horror crossing her face. The amethyst key, she breathed. Lucas turned sharply toward her. What's the amethyst key? What is this? Isaac's gaze moved from Margaret to Lucas, and for the first time, there was something vulnerable in his eyes. Your father's legacy wasn't just about money or business deals. It was about keeping that key safe. If it falls into the wrong hands, it will unlock something that was never meant to be touched. Lucas was trying to piece everything together, but it didn't make sense. You mean, this key? This piece of paper, it's just a key? Isaac shook his head. It's more than that. It's the key to the truth of everything your father's been hiding, and the power that comes with it. But if you want to survive, if you want to stay alive, you have to understand one thing. He paused, his voice low and intense. Your father wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was trying to protect you. Margaret took a step back, clearly overwhelmed. Why? Why didn't he tell me about this? Why didn't he warn me? Isaac's expression softened, but only slightly. Because some truths are too dangerous to reveal. He was trying to keep you safe, but now it's too late. The people who want that secret, they're already coming for you. A cold silence settled over the room, thick and suffocating. Lucas's thoughts were racing. He had always known his father's business had secrets, but this was something else entirely. They were in a fight for their lives, and they hadn't even begun to understand the full scope of it. Suddenly, the door to the safe house rattled. The sound of boots and hurried voices outside snapped them all back into reality. Isaac turned sharply toward the door. They're closer than we thought. You need to move. Now! The echo of footsteps grew louder, their rhythm like the beating of a war drum. The door to the safe house was sturdy, reinforced, but it wouldn't hold against whatever force was coming for them. Isaac's hand shot out, gripping Margaret's arm, pulling her toward the far corner of the room. Get down! He hissed, his voice sharp as the sound of the approaching footsteps vibrated through the walls. Lucas froze, heart hammering in his chest. Everything that Isaac had just revealed, the amethyst key, the enemies after them, was too much to process in the span of a few seconds. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but the moment the door rattled again, all thoughts vanished. Isaac hurriedly dragged them toward a narrow staircase leading downward, hidden behind a stack of crates. Margaret's breath was shallow, panic edging her movements as she stumbled after him. Where are we going? Lucas asked, barely keeping his voice steady. Isaac didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave one last glance at the door, his eyes narrowing. They'll be through that door any minute. We need to get underground. It's our only chance. The stairs descended into a cavernous cellar, the air cooler and more suffocating. The further they went, as they reached the bottom, Isaac grabbed a torch from the wall, lighting it with a match before handing it to Margaret. He seemed to know this place well, as if it was a second home to him. Lucas, still struggling to keep up, shot a glance back toward the staircase. What is this place? He asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and dread. Isaac's face was hard, set like stone. It's a network, a hidden passageway leading to places you can't even imagine. The key is just the beginning. There's more at stake than you realize. Margaret's eyes were wide, darting around the room as if she expected someone to jump out from behind every crate. "Are we safe down here?" she asked, her voice cracking. Isaac nodded, but the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes didn't go unnoticed by Lucas. "For now, but you need to understand. Once they know where we are, this place won't be safe for long." As he spoke, the distant sound of voices reached their ears, muffled through the thick stone walls. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Who are these people?" he asked again, a desperate edge to his tone. "Why do they want the key so badly?" Isaac paused for a moment, staring at the wall ahead, before answering in a voice low enough to be heard only by them. "They're part of a secret organization. They've been hunting your family for generations. Your father was one of the few who could stop them. At least that's what he thought. But now they're after you. After the key." Margaret's hands were shaking as she gripped the torch, its flickering light casting long shadows across the Euler? "This is insane. We can't just keep running forever." Isaac turned to face her, his eyes dark with an intensity that made her flinch. "We won't be running forever, but for now, we need to stay hidden. We need time to figure out what they know, and what they're planning." The words seemed to hang in the air, each one heavier than the last. Time was running out, and Lucas felt the weight of it pressing on him. He had no choice but to trust Isaac, for now. But something in the back of his mind still gnawed at him, a whisper telling him that Isaac wasn't telling them everything. They walked deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels, the walls narrowing as they moved farther from the entrance. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone, each step like a countdown to the unknown. After what felt like an eternity, Isaac stopped in front of an old wooden door, its hinges creaking as he opened it slowly. Inside was a small room, lit by a single hanging lamp. The space was sparse, with only a few chairs and a table in the center. But there, on the table, was something Lucas hadn't expected to see. A large chest, locked with an intricate combination lock. Isaac turned. To them, his face solemn. "This is where the key belongs." Margaret looked at the chest, then at Isaac, a frown tugging at her brow. "What do you mean? That's where the key goes?" Isaac nodded. "Your father hid it here, safe from anyone who could misuse it. This chest holds more than just the key. It holds answers. But it's not just about unlocking the chest, it's about understanding what's inside." Lucas's pulse quickened. "And what's inside?" Isaac didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward the chest, placing his hand on the lock as though in deep thought. "I don't know. Not yet. But we'll find out soon enough." Before Lucas could speak, the sound of boots clanging against the stone floor reached their ears. The voices were closer now, more distinct. Isaac's eyes hardened. "They've found us. We need to get out of here now." The rush of panic gripped Lucas's chest as Isaac's words sank in. The sound of approaching footsteps was unmistakable. He could hear them thudding in the distance, their rhythm deliberate and cold. Isaac didn't waste a second. His hand shot out, pushing Lucas and Margaret toward the far side of the room, the urgency in his movements clear. "Move!" Isaac ordered, his voice low and commanding. They didn't have much time. The passage behind them had already been discovered, and now there was nowhere to go but forward. Isaac led them to a narrow tunnel behind the chest, barely wide enough for them to walk side by side. The walls were damp and the air thick with the smell of earth and stone. It was dark, far too dark to make out anything beyond the faint light from the torch Margaret held. "You've got to tell me what's going on," Lucas said through gritted teeth, trying to catch his breath. He wasn't used to running, especially not like this, with his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. Isaac's face was tense, his eyes flicking back and forth as he checked for any sign of pursuit. "I will. But we don't have time right now." As they rounded a corner, the tunnel widened into another chamber, this one lit by a flickering oil lamp. Isaac held up a hand to stop them. "Here," he whispered. "This is where it starts." Lucas and Margaret exchanged uncertain glances, both of them too exhausted to argue. The gravity of the situation was beginning to settle in, heavy and cold. "Isaac, walked to the center of the room and stopped in front of an old map pinned to the wall. It was aged, yellowing at the edges and covered in faded markings. There were symbols, lines, and arrows, maps within maps, like a puzzle no one had ever quite figured out. "This is it," Isaac said, pointing to a symbol in the center of the. "This is where your father hid the amethyst key. But it's not just a place, it's a doorway to something far bigger. Something that could change the world." Margaret moved closer, examining the map with a mix of awe and fear. "What are these symbols? What does this mean?" Isaac turned to her, his expression serious. "This symbol is the key to everything. Your father was part of a secret order, an organization that has been protecting this key for generations. But there's more. Much more. The key opens not just doors, but paths to hidden knowledge, lost histories, and power beyond comprehension. People would kill to control it." Lucas stepped forward, his frustration boiling over. "Why are you telling us this now? Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Isaac's eyes darkened. "Because I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought I could protect you, Margaret. But the moment you found out about your father's past, it all changed. I can't keep you safe anymore. You need to understand what's at stake." Margaret's breath hitched, the weight of his words sinking in. "So what now? What do we do with all of this?" Isaac placed a hand on the map, his fingers tracing the symbols, moving slowly, as if recalling something from deep within. "We find the next piece of the puzzle. We go to where it all began." Just as he finished speaking, the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly as if something enormous had shifted in the earth. The sound of footsteps grew louder, now right outside the door. "Get down," Isaac hissed, pulling them toward the farthest corner of the chamber. His eyes were frantic now, calculating their next move. "If they find us here, it's over. We need to move quickly." The distant rumble of footsteps was replaced by a muffled voice that sent chills down Lucas's spine. "Where are they?" The voice demanded, cold and authoritative. "Search every room. They can't have gone far." Isaac's jaw tightened and he motioned for Margaret and Lucas to stay low. The tension in the air was palpable, the sound of their breathing the only thing that filled the silence. "This way," Isaac muttered, pulling them into a narrow passageway on the side of the chamber. The walls were close, forcing them to move in single file. With every step, the fear of being discovered gnawed at Lucas, his pulse racing with every sound they heard in the distance. They moved through the tunnel, their footsteps muffled on the cold stone floor. It felt like hours had passed, though only a few minutes had passed since they had entered the room. Isaac led them to a small door hidden behind a stack of crates. He pushed it open, revealing a steep staircase leading downward. "Down," Isaac urged. "This will take us deeper into the network. We'll be safe for a while, but we need to keep moving." Without a word, they followed Isaac down into the unknown. The further they descended, the darker and colder the passage became. The air grew thick, stifling, but there was no time to stop. Every sound, every creak of the old wood underfoot seemed to signal the presence of their pursuers. Isaac moved with purpose, his every step measured, as if he knew exactly where they were headed. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and Isaac paused, looking around. In front of them was a heavy iron door, the kind that could only be opened with a specific code or key. Isaac didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, worn key. With a swift motion, he unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing another room, even darker than the last. Inside, a single faded portrait hung on the wall, a family long gone. And beside it, a large chest sat in the corner, its surface covered in dust. "This is it," Isaac said, his voice steady but laced with something else, something deeper, more personal. "The final piece of your father's legacy." Margaret stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for the chest. "What is this? What's inside?" Isaac stepped back, his face hardening. "It's the truth, Margaret, everything your father tried to protect. But be careful. Once you open it, there's no going back." The chest was heavier than it looked, its worn wood creaking under Margaret's touch as she slowly lifted the lid. Dust swirled around them, catching the dim light of the torch as the room seemed to hold its breath. Isaac stood behind her, his face unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something that spoke of regret, of burden. Inside the chest lay an assortment of old papers, several leather-bound books, and a small, ornate box. Margaret carefully lifted the box, its surface adorned with strange symbols that she recognized from the map. Her pulse quickened. This was it, the key to understanding everything. She looked at Isaac, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" Isaac didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, his eyes on the box, his expression clouded. With something darker, fear maybe, or recognition. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "This is the heart of the Order, the thing they've been looking for all these years." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "And it's the thing that could bring everything crashing down." Margaret ran her fingers over the box, her mind racing. Why would my father hide this from me? Why didn't he tell me about... Duos? Isaac shook his head, his jaw clenched. "He was trying to protect you. He didn't want you to be involved in this world, but now it's too late." Margaret turned the box over in her hands, examining every inch of it. The symbols seemed to pulse with a faint glow, as if alive. She could feel the weight of what it represented, a power greater than she could fully understand. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Isaac's face hardened and he looked away. "Now, we decide whether to open it. But you need to understand something, Margaret. Once you open that box, you can never go back. There's no undoing what's been set into motion." Lucas, who had been standing at the doorway, finally stepped forward. He had been quiet for far too long, absorbing everything but saying nothing. Now, his voice broke through the tension, like a thunderclap. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "What's inside that box? What's going to happen?" Isaac turned to face him, his expression grave. "What's inside is the truth about the Order, about Margaret's father. But it's not just any truth, it's a dangerous truth. People will come for it, and if we're not careful, everything will be lost." Margaret's hand tightened around the box, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. The mystery was unraveling, but the answers were only raising more questions. "Who will come for it?" Margaret asked, her voice firm despite the fear that curled in her stomach. "And why are you so afraid of it?" Isaac's gaze flicked to the door, as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. "There's a powerful faction that has been searching for this box for years. They're the ones who are after you, Margaret. They're the ones who want to control the key, and they'll stop at nothing to get it." The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor, and for a brief moment they all froze. Isaac's eyes narrowed and he moved quickly, closing the chest with a snap. "No more time for talking, we need to go." Margaret felt her heart race, and for the first time she truly understood the gravity of what Isaac was saying. They were no longer just running from danger. They were on the cusp of something much bigger. A legacy, a mystery, and a threat far beyond what she could comprehend. Isaac turned to lead them back to the narrow corridor, his hand gripping the torch tightly. "We have to get out of here. Now!" They hurried through the passageway, each step taking them further into the unknown. But as they moved, the oppressive silence seemed to grow heavier, more suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around them, and Margaret's breath became shallow, each exhale a fight against the panic that threatened to overtake her. "We can't keep running, Isaac," Margaret said, her voice tight with anxiety. "What's inside that box? What's it gonna do to me?" Isaac glanced back at her, his face hardening. "The truth. And with the truth comes responsibility. You have the choice to stop this, Margaret, but you have to make it soon." They emerged from the narrow passage into a small chamber. The air was colder now, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer across the walls. But it wasn't the chill that made Margaret shiver. It was the realization that she was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. Isaac's eyes flicked toward a doorway at the far side of the room. "This way. We're close." But before they could move, a voice called out from the darkness, sending a jolt of fear through Margaret's veins. You're not going anywhere." The voice was cold, malevolent, and all too familiar. Margaret turned, her blood running cold as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Victor. Victor stood in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the room. His eyes glinted with an unsettling mixture of triumph and malice. Margaret's heart thudded painfully in her chest, but it wasn't just the fear that made her freeze. It was the overwhelming sense of inevitability. She had known it was only a matter of time before he found them. Isaac stepped forward instinctively, shielding Margaret with his body, his posture tense. "Victor," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I should have known you'd be here." Victor chuckled softly, the sound sending a chill down Margaret's spine. "You really thought you could hide from me, Isaac? Or from the truth?" He stepped into the room, his eyes flicking over them both with cold amusement. "I've been tracking you for months, you know, and I've been waiting for the moment you'd be foolish enough to open the box." Margaret felt the weight of his gaze on her. She didn't know why, but in that moment she sensed something deeper in his eyes, a strange mixture of recognition and disdain. It wasn't just her father that Victor wanted. It was her. "What? Is this about Victor?" Margaret demanded, her voice shaky but determined. "Why are you after me? After my father's legacy?" Victor smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "You're more important than you think, Margaret. The truth you carry, the power locked away in that box, it's worth everything. And I'm here to ensure it stays where it belongs. With me." Margaret's hands tightened around the box, its intricate symbols now feeling like a curse. She glanced at Isaac, silently asking for guidance, but he was already moving, his body tense, his mind working at lightning speed. "You don't have to do this," Isaac said quietly. "You know the consequences." Victor's eyes flashed with a dangerous gleam. "Consequences? You still don't understand, do you, Isaac? This isn't about consequences. It's about control. This box, this legacy, it's the only thing that matters now." Isaac's gaze hardened. "It's not about control, it's about survival. If you open that box, Victor, you won't just destroy everything Margaret's father worked for. You'll destroy everything." Victor laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You're too late, Isaac. It's already done. The only thing left is to decide who gets to wield the power." Margaret felt a rush of panic. The man standing before her wasn't just a threat. He was the embodiment of everything she feared about the unknown, the mysterious legacy of her father. She didn't know what was in the box, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let Victor have it. "I won't let you," Margaret said, stepping forward, her voice stronger than she felt. Victor's smile faded, and for the first time his eyes narrowed with genuine menace. "You think you have a choice, Margaret? You think you can control this? You've already lost. This is bigger than you." Isaac's face was a mask of resolve as he stepped forward, positioning himself between Victor and Margaret. "We'll see about that." In a flash, Victor's hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the box. Margaret recoiled instinctively, but Isaac was faster. He lunged at Victor, his body colliding with his in a tangle of limbs. For a moment, it was chaos, pushing, shoving, and the sound of heavy breathing as both men struggled for control. But Victor was stronger, faster, and with one powerful shove, he sent Isaac crashing into the wall. Isaac groaned, the force of the impact leaving him dazed. Victor turned back to Margaret, his eyes gleaming. "It's over," he whispered, stepping toward her. Margaret's mind raced. She couldn't let him take it. She couldn't let him win. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she pulled the box to her chest, holding it tight. Victor smirked, unfazed. "You really think you can stop me, don't you?" In that moment, something inside Margaret shifted. It was as if her father's legacy had finally awakened within her. The power in the box wasn't just an object. It was a part of her history. She wasn't just some helpless pawn. She was the key. "You'll have to kill me first," Margaret said, her voice trembling with an energy she hadn't known she possessed. Victor's smile faltered. For the briefest moment, doubt flickered in his eyes, but it was gone almost as soon as it came, replaced by an icy determination. He reached for the box again, but this time Margaret was ready. She stepped back, her foot connecting with the floor beneath her, and in one swift motion she spun around. Her body braced for the fight. Isaac, still recovering, slowly pushed himself off the ground. His eyes met Margaret's, and in that silent exchange something passed between them. A moment of understanding. She wasn't alone in this. With one final, desperate effort, Margaret gripped the box with both hands, ready to protect it at all costs. She wasn't going to let Victor take it. Not now, not ever. Victor's eyes narrowed and his lips curled into a cruel smile. So be it. Before he could make another move, a loud bang echoed through the room, the sound of the door crashing. "Bin?" Margaret turned in time to see a group of figures enter, their faces masked and their eyes cold with purpose. The room had just become much more dangerous. Victor froze, his gaze shifting between Margaret, Isaac, and the newcomers. His expression soured. "It's not over," he spat, his voice low with venom. "This is just the beginning." Margaret's heart raced as she realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about her or Isaac, or even her father's legacy. This was bigger than all of them. The game had changed, and they were no longer in control. The masked figures stood motionless, their presence shifting the air in the room, like a storm about to break. Margaret felt the weight of their gaze even through their concealed faces. She didn't know whether they were here to help or to make things worse. But one thing was clear. Victor's control over the situation was slipping, and that made him dangerous. Isaac, still nursing the pain from his earlier collision with the wall, slowly rose to his feet. His eyes never left Victor, his every muscle taut as though he were preparing for whatever the next moment would bring. But it wasn't just the tension in the air that kept Margaret on edge. It was the overwhelming sense that the truth was about to come crashing down on her. Victor glared at the newcomers, his expression hardening with fury. "What is this? You think you can control this too?" His voice was low, but filled with an unmistakable note of desperation. The leader of the masked group stepped forward. He was tall, his movements fluid and controlled, a stark contrast to the frantic energy Victor exuded. "You've already lost, Victor," the man said, his voice steady and authoritative. "Your time is up." Margaret could feel the shift in the room, the tension between the two men like an electric current. This was no longer just a fight for the box. It was a battle for power, for control of something much more dangerous. Her father's legacy, the secrets he had hidden away, had just become a beacon for everyone with a stake in its potential. Victor's eyes burned with rage. "You think you can just take it from me? I've worked too hard, I've sacrificed too much." His hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "This is mine." Isaac, despite the pain, stepped forward. "You never understood what you were dealing with, did you?" His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made the room seem smaller. "This is bigger than your greed, Victor. This is about the truth, the real truth." Victor's laugh was bitter. "Truth? There is no truth, there's only power." He turned to Margaret, his eyes narrowing. "And you? Don't think for a second that you're going to walk away from this. You're mine. You always were." Margaret's heart pounded. She knew he was trying to manipulate her, but something in his words sparked an awful realization. What if Victor was right? What if her father's secrets weren't just about legacy? They were about control, about her destiny. The man who had spoken earlier, the leader of the masked group, finally took a step forward, his eyes locked with Margaret's, a silent understanding passing between them. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said softly, as though trying to reassure her. Margaret shook her head, her emotions a whirlwind. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered, her voice thick with the weight of everything she had learned in the past few days. The man nodded. "No one ever asks for this kind of power, but you're the one who can make the difference. Not me too." Victor's voice broke through the tension like a knife. "You're wrong. The difference has already been made, and now I'm going to finish what I started." With that, Victor lunged toward Margaret, his hand reaching for the box with the K. same urgency and violence as before. But the masked leader was faster. In a blur of movement, he intercepted Victor's strike, knocking his hand away with a swift motion. There was a moment of silence as the two men faced off, their eyes locked in a battle of wills. Isaac, who had been standing at the ready, finally moved, his voice cutting through the stillness. "We need to leave. Now." Margaret's heart raced as the realization hit her. The situation was spiraling out of control. Victor wasn't the only one who had been planning for this moment. Whoever these masked figures were, they knew far more than they were letting on. And if she didn't act quickly, she could lose everything: her father's legacy, her future, and maybe even her life. Before she could react, the masked leader gave a quick signal, and in a flash, two more figures advanced, closing in on Victor. But rather than trying to subdue him, they circled him, cutting off any escape routes. Victor, for the first time, seemed to falter. "You're trapped," the leader said, his voice cold and final. "This ends now." Victor's lips twisted into a snarl, but there was something else in his eyes: fear. For the first time since he'd appeared, he seemed vulnerable. Margaret noticed it then, the crack in his armor. He was losing. With a violent shove, Victor broke free, shoving one of the masked figures aside. He darted toward the door, but as he reached for the handle, it was ripped open from the outside. Margaret's breath caught in her throat as two more figures entered, their faces hidden behind black hoods, their movements fluid and sure. Victor froze. "You've got nowhere to run," the man at the door said in a voice so low it sent shivers down Margaret's spine. "The truth is out, and there's no hiding from it." Victor turned, his eyes wild. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he shouted. "None of you do." But the masked figures didn't flinch. They simply stood there, waiting, watching, their eyes unblinking. It was clear they weren't here for negotiations. This was the end of the line for Victor. Margaret's hands trembled as she held the box to her chest. She wanted to run, to get away from all of this. But deep down, she knew that wasn't possible anymore. The moment she had opened her father's box, her life had been irrevocably changed. There was no going back. One of the figures stepped forward, and Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She recognized him. His face was familiar, though she couldn't quite place where from. He spoke directly to her, his tone softer than the others. "Margaret," he said, his voice gentle yet commanding, "it's time to go. They can't touch you now. We're taking you somewhere safe." Isaac stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "Safe? Who are you people?" The leader of the masked figures turned his head toward Isaac. "We are the ones who have been watching over her, the ones who knew this day would come." Margaret stared at the man, her heart racing. This wasn't just some random group of people. They were connected to her father, to her legacy. Victor, now surrounded and outnumbered, glared at them all. "You think this is over? You think you can control this?" His voice was hoarse, raw with panic. The leader nodded slowly, his gaze shifting back to Margaret. "Yes, Victor, it's over, and it's time for you to face the consequences." And with that, the first chapter of Margaret's journey came to an explosive close. The silence that followed Victor's retreat was almost deafening. The masked figures stood like statues, their eyes locked on the doorway, making sure there was no further escape. Isaac moved toward Margaret, his face taut with worry. He had been right to distrust Victor from the start, but even now, after everything that had unfolded, the weight of their situation still hung heavily in the air. He could feel Margaret's uncertainty, the flickering question in her eyes that had been there since the beginning. What now? Margaret, holding the box so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, looked up at the leader of the masked group. She had so many questions. Who were these people? Why had they been watching her? And why was her father's legacy so important? That it had drawn them all into a battle of deceit, manipulation, and power. The leader's eyes softened as he took a step toward her. "We didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice more compassionate now. "But we had no choice. You're the only one who can put an end to this madness." Isaac, still standing at Margaret's side, looked from the leader to her, his expression serious. I don't understand, he said. Who are you people? Why have you been hiding in the shadows all this time? The leader's gaze shifted and he motioned for the others to step back, as if sensing the growing tension in the room. We are part of an old order, he began, his words deliberate as though weighing everyone before speaking. A group that's been guarding your family's secrets for generations, secrets that go beyond your father's wealth, beyond anything you could have imagined. Margaret felt her stomach churn. Her father had always been a mystery to her. He was distant, a man whose presence never quite reached her. She had often wondered why he had been so secretive, why he had kept her in the dark about so much of his life. Now the truth was beginning to surface, but it was too much, too fast. She wanted to shrink away from it, but there was nowhere to hide. Your father, the leader continued, wasn't just a businessman. He was the key to a much larger game, one that's been in motion for decades, a game that, if it falls into the wrong hands, could change everything. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? My father wasn't just a businessman? No, the leader replied. Your father was a guardian, like us. He held the key to an empire that stretches far beyond what anyone knows. And now, that key is in your hands. Isaac stepped forward, his voice filled with disbelief. So you've been hiding in the shadows, waiting for this moment to arrive? Waiting for Margaret to inherit this? The leader nodded. Yes, but we didn't choose her. She is the one who was chosen by fate. It's her bloodline that holds the power, and it's her choices that will determine the future of everything. Margaret felt dizzy, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to reject it, to dismiss it as some kind of madness. But deep down, she felt the weight of what they were saying. The power, the responsibility. She had always been a pawn in her father's world, but now it seemed like she was the queen, the one who could either save everything or tear it all down. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Margaret asked, her voice trembling with frustration. Why didn't anyone tell me the truth about my father, about what he did? The leader lowered his head for a moment, as if regretting the past. Your father made the decision to protect you. He believed that you were better off living a normal life, away from the danger that would come if you knew the truth. But now, it's too late. The truth is out, and there are those who will stop at nothing to take what belongs to you. Isaac's jaw tightened. And Victor? What does he want with Margaret? He's a part of a rival faction, the leader said, his tone cold. A group that wants to use the legacy for their own purposes. They'll do whatever it takes to control it. Margaret's mind raced. She had always thought of her father as a distant, cold figure, but now she saw him through a different lens. He had kept so many things hidden from her, not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate desire to protect her from the very power that was now threatening to swallow her whole. And what am I supposed to do? Margaret asked, her voice barely above. A whisper. I never asked for this. I didn't ask for any of it. The leader's eyes softened again, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't have to face it alone. We will help you. We're here to guide you, to make sure that the legacy is used for good. Margaret shook her head, tears threatening to spill. How do I know I can trust you? How do I know that you're not just using me like everyone else? Isaac placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. Margaret will protect you. We won't let anyone take advantage of you again. The leader nodded in agreement. Trust will be built over time, but right now we have no choice. The others won't wait much longer. They know you have the key, and they'll come for you no matter where you go. Margaret felt the weight of his words settle on her like a heavy cloak. Her father's secrets, his legacy, were no longer just his. They were hers now. The truth about who he really was, and what that meant for her future, had just begun to unfold, but there was no turning back. She could feel the storm coming. Where do we go from here? Isaac asked, his voice tinged with concern. The leader paused, then spoke in a voice that carried a hint of finality. We move quickly. There's no time to waste. The path ahead will be dangerous, but it's the only one you can take. Margaret turned to Isaac, his face filled with determination, but also a deep sadness. She knew he was just as trapped in this as she was. Her father's past had become her present, and now it seemed like there was no way out. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We'll face whatever comes next, together." The next few days passed in a blur of hurried decisions and clandestine meetings. Margaret had never felt so disoriented in her life. The world she had once known seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. Each time she thought she had a handle on things, another revelation surfaced, pulling her deeper into the mystery surrounding her father and his empire. Isaac had been her rock through all of it, staying by her side despite the dangers that seemed to follow them. There were moments when she wanted to pull away from it all, to hide from the weight of the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. But every time she looked at Isaac, she saw a determination in his eyes, a quiet strength that urged her forward. They had left the old mansion under cover of darkness, their movements shadowed by the members of the masked group. The leader, who had yet to reveal his true identity, had arranged for them to meet at a remote location outside of the city. Margaret had no idea where they were going or what awaited her there, but she knew one thing for sure. She was being pulled into something far bigger than herself. The drive was long and silent. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of papers as Isaac rifled through old documents he had retrieved from her father's study. Margaret sat in the back seat, her hands clenched around the box her father had left. For her, it felt like an anchor, a connection to the past she was struggling to understand. "Isaac," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "what if we're just pawns in this whole thing? What if the people who are helping us have their own agenda?" Isaac glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "I don't know, Margaret, but I believe in you. We have to trust that the truth will come out in the end. But how do we know who the real enemy is?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Victor, the masked group, they all have their own versions of the truth. And what if the truth is worse than we could ever imagine?" Isaac's grip on the steering wheel tightened, and for a moment, he didn't respond. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "We can't do this alone. We have to trust the people who are on our side. But we also have to keep our eyes open. If anyone tries to manipulate us, we need to recognize it." Margaret nodded, but a gnawing fear settled deep in her chest. What if they were being used? What if she was meant to inherit her father's empire, only to become a puppet in someone else's game? The thought was chilling. As they approached the hidden location, the landscape around them changed. The roads grew narrower, and the city lights faded into the distance. Eventually, they arrived at a secluded estate far from prying eyes. The masked figures were already there, waiting for them at the entrance, as though they had known exactly when they would arrive. The leader stepped forward, his face still concealed by the mask, and gestured for Margaret and Isaac to follow him inside. Margaret felt a lump rise in her throat. There was something about the place, something about the way the leader spoke, that made her uneasy. The whole situation felt like a carefully crafted puzzle, and she wasn't sure if she was the one solving it, or if someone else was pulling the strings. Inside, the mansion was eerily quiet, its grandeur hidden beneath layers of dust and neglect. The flickering lights cast strange shadows on the walls, and the silence pressed down on them like a weight. Margaret felt like she was walking through a ghost story, one that was far too real. The leader led them to a room at the far end of the mansion, where a large table was set with maps, documents, and several electronic devices. It looked like an operations center, and for the first time since meeting the masked group, Margaret felt a shiver of dread. "This is where the truth comes together," the leader said, his voice calm but commanding. "This is where you'll learn everything." Margaret hesitated. She had so many questions, but no answers. She looked over at Isaac, who seemed just as uncertain as she was. They had come this far, but now the final piece of the puzzle was within reach, and it was terrifying. "What do you want me to do?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking slightly. The leader took a step forward, reaching for the box in her hands. Margaret instinctively pulled it closer to her chest, unwilling to part with it just yet. "This box holds the key to everything," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "It's not just a piece of your father's legacy. It's a symbol of the power he wielded, power that must be protected no matter the cost." Margaret frowned. "Power? My father wasn't a politician or a criminal. He was just a businessman." The leader's eyes hardened. "Your father was more than that. He was a protector, a guardian of an ancient secret. And now that responsibility has fallen to you." He gestured to the maps and documents on the table. "You are the last of your line, the only one who can unlock the truth of what your father kept hidden. And once you do, you will decide what happens next." Margaret felt a wave of nausea. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend the enormity of what the leader was saying. Her father had kept secrets from her, that much was clear. But this was something else entirely. "You expect me to just take over?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "I don't want this. I never asked for this." The leader's expression softened. "No one ever asks for this, but sometimes fate chooses you. And you have to make the right choice, or everything your father worked for will be lost." Margaret's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. There was no way out. She had to face the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. Isaac stood beside her, his hand gently resting on her arm. "We'll figure this out together," he said softly. For the first time in days, Margaret allowed herself to believe in that possibility. Together, they could face whatever came next. But as she looked down at the box in her hands, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers it held would change everything forever. The room felt colder now, the weight of the leader's words pressing on Margaret's chest. The truth her father had hidden, the power he had protected, was no longer just a matter of family legacy. It was something far darker, something that had the potential to reshape the world. The mask the leader wore seemed to symbolize the mystery and manipulation woven into every part of her life. Margaret felt a surge of emotions, fear, doubt, and a deep yearning to understand the world her father had shielded her from. But even more pressing was the realization that, in order to protect everything she loved, she would have to take on a mantle she hadn't asked for. The price of this truth was her soul, it seemed. Isaac sensed her growing unease. His hand remained on her arm, a quiet reassurance that they were in this together, no matter what came next. But even he seemed unsettled. The magnitude of the decision was not lost on him. This wasn't just about her family or about business. This was about power, something much more dangerous. The leader took a step closer, his tone soft yet unyielding. "You may not want this, Margaret, but that doesn't matter. Your father didn't want it either. He spent his life protecting the secret, shielding it from those who would exploit it. But now it's your turn." Margaret's fingers tightened around the box, her breath shallow. "What is it? What exactly are you asking me to do?" The leader paused before speaking again, as though choosing his words with care. "This empire isn't just about wealth or influence. It's about knowledge. Hidden knowledge passed down through generations, tied to a legacy far older than your father's business empire. It's a power that can reshape governments, that can control industries and economies. And right now it's falling into the wrong hands. The wrong hands are already at work trying to seize it." A chill ran down Margaret's spine. She had always thought of her father as a man of business, a man who cared deeply about his family and his company. But now, she realized, she had never truly known him. What had he been protecting all these years, and why? "What happens if I don't do anything?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling slightly. The leader's mask betrayed no emotion, but his words were laced with an unsettling urgency. "If you don't step into the role your father left for you, the empire will crumble. The masked group, the people seeking to use this power for their own gain, they will succeed. And they will turn everything you've ever known into ashes." Isaac stepped forward, his voice firm. "We won't let that happen. Margaret doesn't need to take on this burden alone. Margaret looked at Isaac, her heart full of gratitude for his unwavering support. But she knew deep down that this was her fight. Isaac couldn't carry this weight for her no matter how much he wanted to. "I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I didn't even know what was at stake." The leader's voice softened, as if understanding her internal struggle. "Sometimes the truth chooses you. You may not have asked for it, but it has been handed to you, just as it was handed to your father before you. And now you must decide whether to embrace it or let it slip through your fingers." Margaret felt the gravity of his words sink in. There was no turning back. She had to make a choice, whether to take her father's place and fight against those who sought to destroy everything he had built, or to walk away and allow chaos to unfold. The silence in the room was deafening, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Her heart raced, her mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. She thought of her life before this, simple, quiet, and peaceful. And now she was being asked to stand at the center of a storm that could shatter everything. Isaac stepped beside her again, offering his strength without a word. He knew that, whatever happened next, she wasn't alone. After a long pause, Margaret finally spoke, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside her. "I'll do it." The leader's mask remained emotionless, but Margaret saw a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Very well," he said, his voice gravely serious. "Then it is time to begin. But know this. Once you accept this, there is no going back. The cost will be high, and the enemies you'll face will be relentless. But if you're willing to pay the price, you'll have the power to reshape the future of your empire, the future of your legacy." Margaret nodded, feeling a strange mixture of dread and determination settle in her chest. She had made her choice, but the question lingered. What had she just agreed to? And what consequences would it have for her and Isaac? The leader gestured toward the table where the documents and maps lay. "You'll need to study these carefully. The hidden truths are scattered across these files. They hold the key to unlocking the empire your father left behind. You will find the answers you seek if you're ready to face them." Margaret and Isaac moved toward the table, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she looked at the documents before her, a sense of finality washed over her. There was no turning back now. She had crossed the point of no return. The future of her father's empire was in her hands. But at what cost? The quiet hum of the library was broken only by the rustling of papers, the scratch of pens on notepads, and the occasional creak of the wooden floor beneath Margaret's feet. Isaac sat across from her, his brow furrowed as he pored over the documents she had reluctantly agreed to study. The weight of their decision hung in the air, thick and unspoken, but present in every movement. Margaret's hands shook slightly as she opened the first file, her eyes scanning the meticulously detailed pages. The language was foreign to her, filled with codes, ancient symbols, and references to people and places she had never heard of. It was as if her father's empire was built not just on wealth, but on layers of secrets that had been carefully hidden from the world, and from her. Her mind kept returning to the leader's words. "The cost will be high, and the enemies you'll face will be relentless." A part of her had already known this, but the reality of it was far more daunting than she had imagined. Isaac's voice broke through her thoughts. "You don't have to do this alone. We can find another way." She glanced up at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "There is no other way, Isaac. My father didn't just leave me with a business. He left me with a legacy, with a power that I don't fully understand. And now, I have to protect it. I have to protect everything he built." Isaac leaned forward, his hand resting on the table between them. "But at what cost, Margaret? You're talking about facing people who've spent their lives in the shadows. You don't even know what you're up against yet." Margaret swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent her life sheltered from the harsh realities of power, but now those very realities were crashing down on her. The fool. Documents before her contained more than just business plans and strategies. They contained maps to a power that could reshape the world, a power that could either be wielded for good or twisted for evil. "I know what I'm up against," she said quietly, looking back at the papers. "But I also know what will happen if I don't act. This power is too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. It's already been set into motion. And if I don't—" "Stop it now." Her voice trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy between them. The thought of her father's empire crumbling, of the lives affected by those who sought to control everything, was unbearable. Isaac stood and walked around to her side, his expression softening. "Margaret, you don't have to carry this burden alone. You're not your father. You don't have to make the same choices he made." "I'm not my father," she repeated, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. She had spent so much of her life trying to avoid being like him, trying to carve out a path that was her own. But now, it seemed, the path her father had walked was the only one left. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the sound seeming to echo through the room. Time was running out. Margaret turned the page of the file, her eyes widening as she read the next set of documents. These were different, more personal, more revealing. They outlined the history of a secret organization, one that her father had fought against for years. The leaders group, the one that had been working in the shadows, was more than just a band of criminals. They were part of a much larger network, one that spanned continents and governments, seeking to control the flow of information, the distribution of power. The kind of power that Margaret now found herself holding. Her heart raced as she processed the gravity of what she was reading. This wasn't just about business or family legacy anymore. This was about the balance of power in the world itself. Isaac noticed her distress and moved closer, his hand on her shoulder. "Margaret, what is it? What did you find?" She hesitated. For a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But there was no turning back now. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is about the world we live in. My father's empire was built on more than just money. It was built on influence, on secrets, and these people, this group, are determined to take it from me." Isaac's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. "They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Margaret nodded, her fingers trembling as she turned the page to reveal a map marking key locations across the globe, places of interest to the shadowy organization. The dots on the map were all linked, forming a network of influence that could change the course of history. "They won't stop until they have it all," Margaret said, the reality of what she was up against sinking in. "And if I don't act, they'll destroy everything. My father knew this, Isaac. He fought this battle for years. Now it's my turn." Isaac took a deep breath, his hand tightening around her shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll fight this together." Margaret met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, filled with enemies she couldn't even see yet. But she also knew that she had no choice. Her father had left her with this burden, and now she had to carry it. With a quiet resolve, Margaret closed the file, her mind set. "We'll start by finding out who's behind this, who they are and what they want. Then we'll stop them." Isaac nodded, his expression firm. "We'll do whatever it takes." The weight of the moment settled between them. They both knew that the path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and deception. But Margaret had made her decision. There was no turning back now. Margaret stood at the window, staring out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets below, but she hardly noticed the beauty of the moment. Her mind was elsewhere, caught in a whirlwind of revelations, decisions, and consequences. The past few days had felt like a blur, each moment more tense and fraught than the last. The truth about her father's empire, about the enemies who had been plotting against her, had finally been uncovered. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the calm before the storm. Isaac sat behind her, flipping through the final few documents they had gathered. His face was grim, and the quiet clicking of his pen against the papers only added to the tension in the room. They had spent countless hours poring over these files, piecing together fragments of information, trying to make sense of the chaos that had consumed their lives. But even now, with so many answers in hand, the feeling of uncertainty lingered. "How much longer do you think we have?" Isaac's voice broke the silence, low and thoughtful. Margaret didn't turn around. She could feel his gaze on her, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun was nearly gone now, the last traces of light fading into the night. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "But I don't think we have much time left. They're closing in on us, I can feel it." Isaac's sigh was audible. He stood up and walked over to her, standing beside her at the window. They both watched as the city lights flickered on, one by one, like stars emerging in the darkening sky. "I wish it weren't this way," he said softly. "I wish we didn't have to fight them, Margaret. You didn't ask for any of this." "I know," she whispered. "But I don't have a choice anymore, Isaac. They'll stop at nothing to take everything my father built. If I don't stop them, who will?" Isaac didn't reply right away. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, offering the comfort of his presence. But there was a quiet understanding in his eyes that told her that he knew. He knew the kind of fight they were facing. They weren't just up against a group of criminals or mercenaries. They were up against a shadowy, powerful organization with roots that stretched deep into the fabric of society itself. And they would stop at nothing to see their goals realized. Margaret's mind returned to the file she had read just a few hours earlier. The map, the locations, the plans. The leaders of this organization, this secretive network, had already infiltrated positions of power across the globe. They were everywhere, their influence so far-reaching that it almost felt impossible to escape their grasp. But what disturbed her most was what she had learned about the group's leader, the man who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, the person who had orchestrated her father's downfall and was now determined to destroy her. She closed her eyes, remembering the name. Victor Allister. The name itself sent a shiver down her spine. A name she had never heard until now, but one that carried with it an air of danger and power. This man had a history, a ruthless, calculated, and elusive history, and he wasn't going to let her take back what he believed was rightfully his. Isaac's voice brought her back to the present. "We need a plan. We can't just keep reacting to what they throw at us. We need to go on the offensive." Margaret nodded, finally, turning to face him. Her face was set in determination. "I agree, I've been waiting for the right time, but there's no more waiting. If we don't make the first move, we'll be trapped. I need to know everything about Victor Allister, every move he's made, every person who works for him." Isaac stepped back, his expression thoughtful. "I can start gathering intel. There's a network of contacts I've built over the years, people who know things. I'll reach out to them." "You're sure they can be trusted?" Margaret asked, her voice skeptical. The stakes were too high now for mistakes. "I'll be careful," Isaac assured her. "But I think we can count on them. They owe me favors, and in this world, favors count for more than money." Margaret nodded. She appreciated his resourcefulness, but she knew that they were walking a razor's edge. Every step they took could lead them closer to their enemies, or deeper into danger. "We'll need to move fast," she said, her eyes narrowing. "We can't afford to waste time. Once we have the information, we strike." Isaac's face hardened. "What exactly are we striking at?" Margaret's eyes gleamed with a quiet fury. "The heart of Allister's operation, the thing that drives him. I know what it is. It's not just power, Isaac. It's control. He wants to control everything. But he doesn't realize that my father built something more powerful than just wealth. He built a legacy, a network of alliances and resources that could stop someone like Allister." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "You really believe that? That the alliances your father formed are enough to take down someone like Allister?" Margaret's lips curled into a faint smile. "I know they are, but it won't be easy. We're going to need to rally people to our cause. We'll need allies. People who believe in what my father believed in. People who can help us take back what's ours." Isaac nodded slowly, his expression somber. "All right, we'll do it. We'll gather the forces we need, but you're right. Time is running out. We can't wait any longer." The tension in the room thickened. Margaret knew that this was the point of no return. She had made the decision to fight, to confront the darkness that had been lurking in the shadows for so long. And now, with Isaac by her side, she was ready to take the first step into the unknown. As the night fell over the city, Margaret felt a sense of resolve settle over her. This wasn't just about her father's legacy anymore. This was about the future, a future she would shape with her own hands. She wasn't going to let Alistair take it from her. She turned back to the window, staring out at the night sky. The storm was coming, but she was ready. The air was thick with tension as the final showdown approached. Margaret stood at the edge of the rooftop, the wind tugging at her hair and the city below unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The skyline gleamed under the moonlight, a beautiful, serene scene that contrasted sharply with the chaos that was unfolding in her life. She had always known that one day she would have to fight for her father's legacy, but never had she imagined the scale of what was to come. Victor Alistair, the man who had spent years pulling the strings, was now within her grasp. His empire was vast, his reach almost infinite, but it was built on lies, corruption, and betrayal. And now it was crumbling. Isaac stood beside her, his hand resting on the railing. His face was as unreadable as ever, but Margaret could see the concern in his eyes. This was it. There would be no turning back after tonight. "We're ready," Isaac said quietly, his voice steady, though Margaret could sense the unease behind the calm exterior. "Our people are in position. We've secured the routes and the team is prepared. Alistair won't know what hit him." Margaret nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just a mission to take down a criminal. It was personal. For too long she had lived in the shadows of a life she had never fully understood. Now, with every step she took toward Alistair, she was reclaiming more than just her father's empire. She was reclaiming her own future. But it wasn't just about her anymore. Isaac, the man who had stood by her since the beginning, was there, with her now, and they shared a bond that no enemy could break. He had become her ally, her protector, and perhaps even something more. But tonight their paths would diverge. After this was over, everything would change. "I know what I have to do," Margaret said, her voice low but filled with determination. "But I need you to understand, Isaac. This isn't just about the business. It's about justice, about righting the wrongs my father left behind." "I understand," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. There was no hint of doubt in his gaze, only the unspoken promise of support. "We'll see this through, together." Margaret's heart swelled with gratitude, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. There was no room for sentimentality right now. The enemy was close, and time was running out. The plan had been set in motion days earlier. Isaac had used his network to infiltrate Alistair's inner circle, feeding Margaret critical information about his movements. Every detail had been accounted for, every trap laid. But even as they prepared to strike, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The pieces didn't fit perfectly. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was a possibility they were being led into a trap. As if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Margaret pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was an encrypted message from an unknown source. She opened it, and her breath caught in her throat. "You're too late. You've already lost." The message was signed simply with a symbol. Alistair's symbol. Margaret's pulse quickened. The trap had been set long ago. This wasn't going to be the quick victory they had hoped for. Alistair had been expecting them all along. Isaac stepped forward, peering over her shoulder at the message. His face darkened as he absorbed the information. He knew. He's been playing us from the start. Margaret's mind raced. She had always known that Alistair was a master manipulator, but this was beyond anything she had anticipated. "We can't back down now," she said firmly, her eyes narrowing with resolve. "We go in, we finish this." Isaac hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but we do it my way, we take no chances." Margaret felt a surge of gratitude for Isaac's calm leadership, but the reality of their situation was undeniable. They had walked into a lion's den. The final confrontation was about to begin, and it was going to take everything they had. The building where they were to meet Alistair was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It had been chosen carefully, a place that would give Alistair the upper hand, with hidden exits and fortified walls. But Margaret wasn't afraid. She knew the truth now. She knew who she was and what she had to do. As they approached the warehouse, Isaac led the way, his team of operatives flanking them in silence. The tension was palpable, and Margaret could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had come this far and there was no turning back. Inside the warehouse, everything was eerily quiet. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the large, empty space. Then a voice rang out from the shadows. Well, Alistair's voice was smooth, calculating. The prodigal daughter returns. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist, but it's too late, Margaret. You've already lost. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her hand resting on the gun at her side. Not yet, Alistair. Not until I say it's over. She could hear him move closer, the sound of his footsteps growing louder. You think you can take back what's mine? You've been living in a dream, Margaret. Your father's empire is nothing but ashes. And soon so will you be. He stepped out of the shadows, his face twisted in a smug grin. But there was something in his eyes, something dark, that sent a chill down Margaret's spine. This man wasn't just a criminal. He was a force of nature, and he would stop at nothing to destroy her. Margaret's voice was steady as she spoke. You don't know who you're dealing with, Alistair. This isn't just about the Empire, it's about right and wrong. And you're on the wrong side of history. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Margaret thought she saw something flicker in Alistair's eyes, a hint of uncertainty. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by cold, ruthless confidence. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. Then let's see how long you can stand against the storm, Margaret. Before she could react, he pressed a button. The entire building shook as an explosion ripped through the walls, sending debris flying in all directions. The fight had begun. As the dust settled, Margaret's mind was clear. She couldn't let him win. Not now. Not ever. With a cry of determination, she leapt into the fray, her every move calculated, her every decision sharp. She knew that the battle for her father's empire had just begun, but this time she wouldn't fight alone. Isaac was by her, their forces closing in, and Alistair, despite his bravado, was beginning to realize something. He had underestimated Margaret, and that would be his downfall.